Welcome to the Quaintrelle podcast.
There are 3 different types of radiation: alpha, beta, and gamma.
What does this technology do? It's like, well, what can you do with electricity?
I just survived 30 years HIV positive. I'm certainly not going to let a little thing like a brain tumor derail me.
When I got to 29 pounds, I was so tired, I just collapsed.
Everything always goes back to being grounded and centered.
It's a mecca for cycling, for sure.
Struggle is the neutralizing force.
And I said, there it is. This is the right family. I got like cold chills.
It's one lone oak tree right in the middle of the trail. It's beautiful.
Hi, everybody. I hope you've had a great week since the last time that we got together. I'm going to go ahead and get right into this in the company of friends talk with my longtime and dear friend, Tamara Madison, who is a poet, an educator, and a true Quaintrelle. She's written 2 volumes of poetry, including Moraine and Wild Domestic, both of which I have covered in sticky notes and I absolutely love. She's also the author of a chapbook called The Belly Remembers, which won a 2004 Buell Bradley Prize. Her work's been featured in Garrison Keillor's The Writer's Almanac and several other publications. And since retiring from teaching high school level English and French, she has continued to hone her love of poetry. This year publishing a second chapbook that's called Along the Fault Line. Just to provide some context, we start out talking about relationships and later on our love of language and Tamara's poetry. This episode comes with a warning. We cover some mature subjects, so please be aware. So grab a cuppa and join Tamara and me in what will be part 1 of a 2-part talk. Enjoy.
Yeah, that's a shame. I'm still coping with resentment too. And that's just my anger at myself, silly, stupid stuff like that. I resent that even now. If I think about it, it pisses me off. It's like, where did he get off? And why couldn't I take that up with him? Why did I just acquiesce? So I get mad at myself, but I learned.
I think that the more you think about it, there's still stuff that's coming out now that I'll think about. Like, I realize that because of particular parenting styles, the fact that my mom and my biological dad were divorced when I was 3. I just call him Francisco because I literally have not seen him since I saw him such few and far between times in my life. And the last time I saw him, I was 18. So he's really a non-person in my life, and before I was 18, I saw him for about 5 days when I was 18. And then prior to that, I had not seen him since I was about 7 years old. So he's really been a non-person in my life. And I realized that even though I've gotten to a point where I have full acceptance over the fact that he's not part of my life, I'm okay. I don't need him to be in my life. My mom remarried. I have a stepdad that is my dad for all intents and purposes. And he's been around since I was about 8 years old. That has resulted, as much as it doesn't seem like it should because of everything I just said, in my choices in dating. And it's taken me being alone for this amount of time and, some of the dating that I did to realize that there are issues that you're always just going to have to work through. As time moves on and you go back and kind of examine that, you'll start making some connections and realize, oh, okay. And then sometimes that, at least for me, it seems to absolve some of that anger. Like, okay, yeah, that totally wasn't cool, or it wasn't cool that was the result of that interaction. But also I see why it happened and I can move forward because I've learned my lesson. I guess it's all lesson learning.
Yeah. And some people just don't learn and they keep doing the same old things, and some of us learn. And think I learned a bit this time.
Yeah.
I hope so.
I think you always do. And I think one of the biggest gifts is that you are comfortable being by yourself. So you know how to love yourself, you know how to nurture yourself. And I think that's where it all starts, is being able to have that, because it's a lot harder when people aren't able to love and nurture themselves and really need to have the distraction of another person there. Not necessarily somebody that they love, but the distraction of somebody else, so that they don't have to spend time by themselves.
Yeah. I remember that my mother really hated being alone. And when she was single, she put out classifieds in the newspaper, and that's how she met guys. She did.
That's so progressive. How old was she and what time period was this?
It started in her late 60s after my dad died. She would go on the classifieds. She met mostly younger men who wanted a younger woman, but she had quite a lot of appeal, and so she made some friends that way. And at one point, she dated several guys that she met that way, and then she hooked up with someone that I grew up with, and I was friends with his daughter, somebody that I'd known for a long time. She was very happy with him, and then when he died, once again, the classifieds came out, and she was talking to some guy that she'd met on the classifieds, and then she realized that she played bridge with this guy every week, and it just never occurred to her to think of him that he might be looking for a relationship. Anyway, they were very, very different, but he was her last boyfriend, and they were together for several years, and she just hated being alone, and I don't feel that way. I was single for just a couple of years. In my 20s, I was very happy living alone, and I met my second husband at that point. And I had decided I would never marry again unless everything was perfect. And I met this guy, and everything was perfect. And so we got married.
Wow, that's so magical.
And then, of course, everything wasn't perfect after that. But, I really missed living alone. And so I get to do it again, and I like it even more than I did before.
That's wonderful. I think everybody should, especially, I never did live alone until I was divorced. And I don't think that living alone frightened me. I did a lot of things alone because of the marriage that I was in. It was like, well, if I'm going to do this, I either get to do it alone or I get to not do it at all. So I was quite comfortable with doing things by myself. So I wasn't afraid of being alone, but I think I was really sad. I was really sad of the prospect of ending up alone. Part of it was, after all of that, like 26 years, I'm alone. Like, if somebody would have told me, I'm looking in my crystal ball at the beginning of this relationship, and you will end up alone at the end, I wouldn't have gone through all of that, because, being married is hard work. So there was a lot of hard work there. But I was really sad. And, part of it is being invested in being part of a partnership. Part of it is all of that for nothing. And it's not for nothing. There's so much value in just spending time with yourself and getting to know who you are and figuring out what your likes are, what your personality is, what your strengths are. I think that you can't do that without spending time by yourself and having that introspection and just really examining the world from your own perspective without having somebody else going, no, what I actually see is this. So like, you need to reframe your lens there. It's really a valuable thing. It's really a good thing. And I think it expands, it makes you wiser in many ways.
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel pretty damn wise.
Yeah, I think you are. I always have thought that,
Yeah, well, wisdom is one thing, but I think I was at the pinnacle of wisdom when I was like 17. I knew all the mistakes I would never make, and then I made them all, because that's what life is about, making mistakes. And it's easy to be smart when you're 17 and haven't lived yet. And I was really smart.
Isn't that funny? Yeah. Yeah, I think that's probably true for me. It's funny, 17, that is just such an transformative age. Every song you
Yeah, you're an adult almost.
Mhm. Yeah. I think I was pretty smart when I was 17 too.
I bet you were.
But yeah, then I went out and did all the things I wasn't supposed to do. I think that the biggest thing is when I was 17, I knew that I was going to go out and conquer the world. I was going to have a great job. I was going to be super successful. I was just going to go out there and get that tiger. And then I fell in love.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that happens so much, you fall in
Mm-hmm.
love and that's all that matters. Everything else falls by the wayside.
Yeah, it's sad. I met my second husband when I was in school and I was about to graduate. And so I had a job lined up to teach English in Japan. And I was looking forward to that. I'd been studying Japanese for a year intensively, and it sounded like a good way to get started. And then I met Ron and he talked me out of it. He said, "Oh, well, let's go somewhere else and teach English. Let's teach English in Brazil. Wouldn't that be great? Brazil." And I thought, well, okay, yeah, Brazil. I like Brazilian music. Fine, that'd be good. Okay. And of course, it turned out to be not as easy as teaching English in Japan was. We couldn't. Anyway, he admitted to me years later that he had no intention of going to Brazil to teach English. So instead,
he manipulated you and took your dream away.
Yeah, he did. He did. And yet, I still love him. He was the love of my life. I came to realize that over the last couple of years, even though he took my dream away and he lied to me.
Yeah.
But I get it. What do they say in French? The heart has its reasons that reason just can't understand. And that's the truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We loved each other in spite of it all. But again, I was glad to get divorced from him. It didn't stop our relationship because we had children, and that's fine. It probably wouldn't have stopped our relationship anyway, because whatever it was that attracted me to him and him to me, was something that didn't ever really go away.
Yeah, I think that we're all just trying to get through life. We're all trying to meet our goals, but we also can't do that without having others in our lives. And so you're always trying to balance somebody else's wants with your own wants, and just having those different desires working on each other is always going to result in something different, something that you didn't plan on. One of them is going to be stronger than the other. And so some desires get abandoned, like your dream of teaching English in Japan. That would have been so interesting,
Yeah, but it would have been, but I didn't have my heart set on it. It was just something to do.
Yeah. So that's why it was easy to get talked out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think I have a lot of wherever it is that dreams go to commiserate with each other for not having come true.
Yeah.
I have a big space that is filled with those dreams. And, so some of them are really fantastic and they just don't happen. And others are just, like, this would be great, but something better came along.
Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, I've got to write that down because I got an idea, something to write about when you're saying.
Nice.
Well, the idea of dreams, I don't know about you, but you probably have some place where you keep your orphaned earrings.
Oh, yeah.
That'll work itself into a poem someday.
Yeah. You know what I did a while ago? It just seems like a lot of things that I have to talk about have a sad story associated with them. And I guess maybe that means I'm getting old because they just seem to start out that way. But I had this beautiful, beautiful tree out front, and my kids had helped me plant it, helped me dig the hole, I did all of this research to get this tree that wasn't going to mess with the pipes. It's a cassia tree, and it's got the most amazing ball of flowers when it blossoms. They're just gorgeous, like a flaming universe. They're this beautiful golden color. And Sophie and I left to visit Cameron when he graduated from boot camp And 2 days after we came back from that visit, the tree was there in the morning when I left. I loved that tree so much. It seems almost ridiculous, but I love that tree. And I came home at lunch and there was no tree in my yard.
What happened?
My former in-law had it removed, didn't consult with me at all. And I opened my door and I fell on the street. I just fell on my knees. It was like somebody had socked me in the stomach. All that was left, they put it through a grinder. It was the most beautiful tree ever. And it's one of the biggest heartbreaks of my life still to this day.
I mean, they could have cut off a branch maybe that was in the way or something. And to do it without consulting, was it her house? Did she own the house?
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Sophie and I were so depressed. We were so depressed. And so it took about a month and a half for me to finally go out there, and I picked through the little bits of tree that were left. And I found some pieces. They were like a quarter size. And the other thing that had happened right around the same time was my cousin had to cut down a tree on her property. So I took that tree and I found this woman who would make keepsake boxes. And I called her up and I said, hey, I have all of this wood and I have these very special pieces of this tree. Could you do something with it? So she said yes. She used the olive wood from my cousin's property, and she used some of the pieces as decor for these boxes. I ended up getting like 5 boxes for my cousins and Cameron, Sophie, and myself. And then my lost earrings and broken jewelry, I took those over to her and she used them to decorate the boxes. And they are the most beautiful keepsakes ever. They're so special. Yeah, I don't know. I guess talking about lost earrings or something triggered that story, you know. And I do have to say that in the meantime, the tree started just sending a bunch of suckers out, and it went through a metamorphic stage and it's come back out as this beautiful tree again. So
yeah, I can completely understand being in love with a tree. Makes sense to me. Mm-hmm. There's a little known book by John Steinbeck. Not too many people have read it that I've found, but I've read it a couple times. I haven't read it for a couple of decades, and I read it the first time when I was a teenager, I think, and then again in my 30s, and it was a very good book. It's called To a God Unknown, and there is a very important tree in that story. I recommend it. You're looking around for something good to read.
I'm going to read it, To a God Unknown. Yeah. I love that. I read recently the Overstory. The entire book is basically an ode to trees. It's so beautiful. And who is the other author? He wrote the Siddhartha.
Oh, Herman Hesse?
Herman Hesse. He's got a few books out there about trees. He was a huge tree lover.
Oh, I did not.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what the quote is. As a man sees a tree, so is his heart.
See that? That makes sense.
Yeah. Speaking of books, I really wanted to talk to you about your books.
Ah, okay.
So you've got 2 volumes of poetry. Actually, I have a 3rd book here. I don't think I have all of your books. I'm not sure if these are in the right order, but the first one I got from you was Wild Domestic, which is a really wonderful collection of poems. And then I picked up Moraine, and I had the honor to come and listen to you read poems from these books at the different times. And they are completely covered with sticky notes because I do read them when I'm cleaning the shelves. I usually pull one or the other down and read a poem or a few, or, you know, sit down, and because it's more fun to read poetry than it is to dust. So I'll read quite a few poems. And the other book that I've got is Along the Fault Line, which is more of a chapbook. It's a little bit shorter, and it's got some really wonderful poetry in there. I know you've got another one that's called The Belly Remembers, and that one won a Buell Bradley Prize. And your work's been featured in Garrison Keillor's The Writer's Almanac and several other publications, including Chiron review or Chiron?
Chiron.
Chiron. Thank you. I was completely wrong every single time. Thank you. Chiron review, your daily poem, A Year of Being Here, Sheila-Na-Gig, and Nerve Cowboy, just to name a few. And since retiring high school level English and French, you've continued to hone your love of language and acute insights that I think are just rich and sensual and haunting, this blend of life and emotion and philosophical perspective by completing that last book that I just mentioned, Along the Fault Line, which was it released this year?
Yeah, it was released in March. I still haven't had a book release party for it, but I might end up not doing that.
Oh no, I love your book release parties.
Yeah, I should have. I just, with COVID still on, I'm kind of hesitant looking for the right venue with that. And I've been busy. Yeah, that's my most recent book. And then I have another one that's going to be coming out next year from Sheila-Na-Gig. And I'm excited about that. And then I have another manuscript that I'm chopping around right now.
So the manuscript, is that not poetry? Because it seems like most of what you write, at least what I've seen, is poetry. Is that right?
Yeah, that's really what I write poetry. I don't write other stuff too much. I don't publish anything but poetry anymore. So yeah, I think poetry is it. I've just kind of realized I'm not going to be writing novels. I don't have a sense of plot, so I'm not really good with fiction. I think in metaphors, and plus I just love poetry. Poetry is, you can say so much in a short space, and I like the economy of it. And I really think poetry should be more popular than it is, because we're really an impatient society these days. We don't sit still for very long. We're always looking at our phones. Why not just look at a poem instead? I mean, they're really short. You can read a poem quickly and get something out of it. People should read more poetry. There, I said it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's that quick snapshot, that tweet. They are short. And I think that because of that brevity, you really have to have a good grasp of language and a deep understanding of meaning beyond that. I mean, it's not just enough to throw a word down there. You have to understand what the meaning of it is. You don't need that with long form. You don't need that with essays or novels, because you could spend as many pages as you want describing something, but with a poem, you have half a page. But that's it.
Yeah. You have to know what you're saying. That was a mistake I made when I was young. I've written poetry all my life pretty much, but I went through a stage of just trying to sound smart and not really knowing what I was even writing about. So yeah, you have to know what you're writing about. It can't just be a bunch of cute images or fun words that go together. It has to be more than that. But I love it.
Yeah. I kind of think that in some ways, poetry is coming back. I think people are starting to notice it a lot more. I see it on my feed, and I've seen quite a few books that have been published that really are a collection of poems. But in the expansion of that collection of poems is also an overarching story, which I think happens with a lot of your poetry, where you're sharing a life story. I think your mom comes through a lot as this very elegant woman who never really was made to live in a sandy, dusty,
out in the middle of nowhere.
Out in the middle of nowhere, citrus farm.
Right. She was a city girl. And, they called it, this is a poem that didn't make it into the collection, but they called it The Ranch, even though it was a farm, because my dad had told her early on. She didn't even know him very well when they got married. They'd only known each other for 2 weeks. And this was World War II and all that. And then he was off at training camp somewhere. And he kind of forced the issue. So she married him. And then right before they got married, she said, "Wait a minute. I don't even know what you majored. What did you study in college?" And he said, "Agronomy." And she asked him what that was. "Well, it's farming." And, "Oh, no. Are you going to be a farmer?" And he said, "No, honey, I'd never put you on the farm." So he bought the land without telling her and called it The Ranch.
Oh, she must have been so disappointed.
Oh, it was very hard for her, but she was a child of a broken home. who really was her own mother's mother. She had to mother her mother. Her mother was a mess. And my mother was just very strong. And so she was not going to make her children grow up in a broken home. So she just did whatever she had to do to keep it going.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't always great.
Yeah. Well, going back to what we were talking about earlier, I can completely relate to that because that was precisely one of the reasons why I was still in a marriage 22 years in, 26 years total, was because I didn't want my kids to grow up in a broken home.
Right.
And part of that reason is because I grew up in a broken home and I don't have good memories, I guess. Is that the right word? That's why I paused because I don't know if memories is the right word, but but I never realized how much more damaging it could be to grow up as a child in a home where the relationship is shit. It could be just as bad.
Yeah, that could be bad too. Yeah, I remember one time my brother and I urging my parents to get divorced just because they were fighting. And it was just so unpleasant. And that wasn't going to ever happen. Never did. My mom stayed with him till the end, and it was difficult for her.
How long were they married?
Let's see, my dad was 68 when he died, and I guess he was like 24 when they got married. So however long that is, it's a number.
40-something years.
Yeah, but they were attracted to one another. I mean, there was a spark for sure between them always.
Mm-hmm.
And no, maybe at the end, no, there wasn't from her side. That was it for her. But anyway, she had a really good relationship after that with one guy. So.
That's good. A little redeeming quality there to everything that she had to put up with. And it just seems like she was always really super elegant, regardless. It was like, I just imagine this lady with her drugstore brand perfume and your dad smelling of oils and chemicals that he used both driving off to, go to wherever it was that they were going. And just such a seemingly mismatch of personalities.
Oh, yeah. They were really different. Although they looked good, though. When they went to those fancy parties, they always looked really good. He cleaned up pretty well.
Mm-hmm. What made him... I garden, and the little bit of gardening that I do, it is really hard to get stuff to grow because you put it out there and, I just think that we have these ideas of you're just going to put these plants or these seeds in the ground and you're going to water them every day and they're going to produce whatever it is that you're expecting them to produce. And then all of a sudden you've got grubs that are eating the roots. I couldn't figure out why my cucumber and my scarlet runner beans were so puny. I think I got like 2 cucumbers and 3 beans or something. I had them in the same area and I found out that they use the same nutrients and so they fight each other. You're never supposed to grow them next to each other.
Oh, there's so much to learn.
There's so much. You would never think this, and then the raccoons come to eat the grubs, and the possums, and they're throwing your plants around, and now everything's dying, and then you have some beetles that are eating it, and aphids, and it's really hard, and I'm really lucky. I feel so fortunate every time I get something from the yard. But your dad chose basically was it a dust field that he decided to turn into a citrus farm? He really had an uphill battle to make this place work.
Yeah, it was sand. And he was a product of an agricultural school. He went to the University of Iowa. He was from Iowa. He was a farm boy. And he just didn't want to live where it was cold anymore. So he moved to California and he knew all about the latest techniques, science. He used science. He was always on a crusade against anything that would get in the way of nourishing the trees. So he was mad about weeds. He would not tolerate any weeds growing. Now, of course, people see things differently. But when he was farming, he had to get rid of anything that grew that wasn't a tree. And he couldn't support us with the proceeds from the farm. So he had a business with another guy selling farm chemicals, and they mixed together things and whatever. They sold these farm chemicals. So my dad was a big proponent of chemicals, and he hated Rachel Carson, and she really pissed him off. He thought DDT was wonderful. I mean, I was raised on DDT.
Oh my goodness.
And my brother being the boy, had to farm, and they used Agent Orange to kill the weeds. And I remember the smell of it, and their clothes would be all red and everything. But my brother's a healthy 70-something-year-old guy. So somehow he didn't get cancer or something from it. But
that's amazing.
That could be where my dad got Parkinson's, but we'll never really know for sure. But yeah, that's how my dad did it. Ways that are not really smart. I don't know. I think modern farming is learning more about things like that. Eventually, I mean, it's going to be slow because factory farms run the old-fashioned way about, one crop, deplete the soil, kill whatever you don't want,
Mm-hmm.
So that's how my dad did it. It was all alchemy.
There's something I think exciting in that especially for guys, like I'm a scientist, but I was ordering nematodes. I don't know, I paid $60 for a little package of powdered nematodes that you add water to, and that makes them come alive, and you sprinkle them all over the place. And, there's nematodes that'll eat grubs, and there's nematodes that'll kill ants, and it's all natural. And I know that that's the slow way because maybe there was some impact. I didn't really notice it. So I can see where you would get impatient, especially if you're trying to raise a family on a farm that's not producing the finances that are needed with natural methods.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you grow up there through college? You were in Mecca?
Yeah, we moved there when I was 2. We lived in Covina before, West Covina, and I don't remember that at all. And we lived on the farm. I guess we moved away when I was 11 because I learned later one of the girls in my class was pregnant by her dad. And my parents, they didn't want me growing up in that kind of environment anyway. I went to public school, and the public school down there in Mecca was... it was a country school, and the other kids were either landowners' kids or farm workers' kids, and mostly farm workers' kids. And, I try to write about this a lot because I came from privilege. I'm white, and my father was college educated, and, we were landowners. And I went to school with kids whose parents worked on the farm, not our farm, but other farms, and it was very different. And, I had all these advantages those kids didn't have. So I skipped 2nd grade because I already knew a lot of that stuff. We moved to Palm Desert when I was in 6th grade. And that was really exciting to me because it was like a city. Right? There were kids to play with on my street. It was like a street. It wasn't a road. It was a street. And, so that was really exciting at first. And that's really where we lived until I was old enough to drive. And then we moved back to the farm because it was hard on my dad to drive home from the farm every day with the sun in his eyes because he'd be driving west. Mm-hmm. So, and also he had a stroke and needed to be back on the farm. And so we moved back there as soon as I could drive. And I lived there. And by that time, I was old enough to appreciate the farm. When I was young, I appreciated it in lots of ways. But it get to a certain age and you just want to be around peers. You don't want to be stuck in the middle of nowhere forever. And by the time I was 16, being in the middle of nowhere had a certain charm. I could understand it.
Yeah.
And then I went to college, and that was that. And then I used to go around. We kept the farm for a while, and I used to go there in the winter. I'd take my kids down there because no one was living in the house. Take the kids and the dog, and we'd spend the weekend in the winter hiking in the desert and just enjoying the silence, picking the ripe fruit. And it's pretty charming, and they have good memories of it would happen. We'd hike in the desert, but we'd walk in the orchard to pick fruit from the trees.
Nice.
It was grown by my dad or my brother. Yeah, my kids have really good memories of the farm, and I'm glad about that. But my brother sold it because there wasn't any point, really, in keeping it. It didn't make any money, and it was a lot of hard work. He still kind of feels apologetic about it, and I don't understand why. But, nobody was living out there, and I only went there like 5 times a year. So I get it, but I miss it. But I was very attuned to it. I've written a lot of poetry about the farm, and this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg, but I didn't want to get boring, so I didn't want to make a full-length manuscript out of it.
the poetry of the farm is sprinkled throughout the books that I have. And I don't think that they would ever get boring because there's so many life lessons. And I do remember I was trying to find the poem. I couldn't remember which one it's in, about the little girl that got pregnant by her father. And
Oh, that's in Moraine.
yeah, and it was just, I mean, the way that you wrote it, you're just sitting there having this nice time. She just lets you know very like this mundane thing. Oh,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
thing happened to me, and you're so innocent and impressionable at that age where it's kind of like, oh, okay, well, that happened and it doesn't seem so terrible. But as an adult reading this story, it's incredibly tragic and just gutting. And again, just going back to the preciseness of telling, I tend to write long form, I write novels. And that would be a novel all on its own for me, whereas you've got it in maybe a page. It might be a little bit more than a page. And it's the whole story right there. And it's just this old photograph that you're looking at, and you're just trying, you reread it because you're examining it like this is such a great tragedy, and yet it's being presented through the sweet perspective of a child, and that just makes it so much more painful to read.
That's what I like about poetry, that you can tell a story in a few lines. I just like a snapshot, like you say. I feel like a good poem should be like a snapshot.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good, yeah, why not?
Yeah, they say a picture tells 1,000 stories, but I think a poem paints an entire picture. Yeah, there's some really good stories in here. I'm just looking at here. I'm trying to turn to a page because I have all of these stickies with little hearts on them. You have this great poem that's called Midsummer, and it's just, wanting to stay in the green world and midsummer to last forever. But
yeah, that's about aging.
Mm.
And summer, I wrote that when I was still teaching, and summer was, back then, summer was almost 3 months long. They thought it would be smart to make it shorter. I don't think I'm still angry about that.
Oh my goodness. I know. One of my friends is posting already. He lives in Dallas, and he said that classes started today. Today was the first day. And actually, one of my other friends who lives in Big Bear posted that today was the first day of school for those kids.
That's just wrong. That's just so wrong.
Yeah.
What happened to summer? I don't know. As a teacher, I was exhausted until about this point in summer. Right about end of July, I started to feel finally rested. And then I'd have August to enjoy summer and to get my mind ready and start working on, what I'm going to teach. But I'd put that off till the very last minute because I'd get it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then somewhere along the line, they switched it up and made it short. We had to go back, in the early August. And then we'd go back and the air conditioning wouldn't work in the building. This happened year after year. And it would take weeks before they could get it and someone out to fix it. And I remember that was hell. And I don't know how they're working. I don't know if that's still going on. I shudder to think. Probably is. We just go later in June because June here is still cold. And, it's cloudy and cold and not summery. So I don't understand. Why can't we just go through June and then July and August and part of September? That can be summer. But, that's just me because I like summer and I like being outside and all that.
Well, yeah, no, it's logical to go through June and then go back in September instead.
Yeah. And just keep, because when it's hottest is when the kids don't want to study. I mean, not that they ever do, but, school just doesn't seem right when it's that hot. Oh, well, they don't care. Nobody cares what I think, so about that.
I bet.
But I do.
I bet it's really nice to not have to go to school.
It really is. And I'd completely forgotten about it. I arranged for, reserved a place for my kids to all get together, my son and his family and my daughter and her entourage. It was cheaper to do it later in August. And so I just arranged it. And then I found out it's my grandson's he will have gone to kindergarten for a week. He'll have to take a whole week off kindergarten. And they didn't want to do that at first, but it was too late. I'd already made it. And besides, it's kindergarten. He'll learn plenty down here.
Right.
But now I thought, oh, darn, now I have to factor that in. I've got a grandson in school. It's school again, rearing its ugly head.
There's some really, really good poetry out there that rhymes. Some of your poetry rhymes, but more often than not, it doesn't. What makes a poem work, in your opinion? Because they all work, whether they're rhyming or not.
Well, I think it's a lot of things. First of all, clarity of subject. You have to know what you're writing about. And I think imagery is very important. Stanley Kunitz said, end on an image. And I think ending on an image is good for any kind of writing, even if it's a letter. Ending on an image is really satisfying to the reader and often thought-provoking. So words, using the right word, and sound. Sound is important. I've actually started putting more rhyme into my poetry, but not end rhyme necessarily, kind of a maybe slant rhyme, or I like to end a poem on a rhyming couplet if it works out. But what makes a poem good is, most important, clarity of subject and knowing when to stop and what to leave out, using the right words that sound right. There's a lot of people writing these days somehow got this idea that you have to get rid of articles. And I feel like sometimes it's really off-putting. It's like, there should be a hand on the end of that arm. Why did you cut the hand off? Sometimes using and or the gives it a beat. And also it changes the meaning too. And you just shouldn't just be getting rid of articles just because they're small. So
yeah, that might be a casualty of, these brief 142 characters for tweet, or just, you've got all these acronyms, LOL for laugh out loud, that sort of thing. And I think that articles became part of the casualty of that trend.
Maybe, but I think it's been going on longer than Twitter. I don't know, but I don't believe in it. Okay. Sometimes I want to use an article. Sometimes you need to know it's not just any blade of grass, the blade of grass, the particular one I'm looking at. So you tell me to get rid of the, forget it. I'm not listening to you,
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you just need that extra beat. I think you need to read everything out loud and make sure it works, because, poetry is essentially spoken. It's spoken word, although some poems work better on the page than others. Some poems are not meant to be read aloud, I guess, but most, I think, should be. And even so, in any kind of writing, I think the mark of good writing is a certain rhythm. When you read enough good writing, then you can tell when something's not rhythmically right.
I think it's important too, speaking of that, being able to write in an active voice versus a passive voice. And I know that's, what passive voice.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. The stagnation that you get from passive voice is just, that drives me crazy.
Well, you're removed from the action. You're removed from the heart of the story. I mean, people, if you listen to people talk, people tend to use passive voice when they don't want to be emotionally involved.
Mm-hmm.
It would be nice to receive a blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Just say what you mean. Poetry should be more blunt. It should say what it means and not make guess about it. But a little mystery is good. Having people think about it. I know sometimes people think you should include explanations. If you use a word that people aren't familiar with, you ought to use a word that people are more familiar with or whatever. But if it's the right word, let them use the dictionary. It's not hard to look up a word these days,
Oh, I am such a friend of dictionaries and thesauruses. I want to know every possible word that I can use to say the same thing, because there's nuances in using, say, like last night, I was looking for the right word and I was thinking about these combinations of what I was talking about. And I thought, I need to say in every permutation. And I thought, but that's not exactly it. So I did find a thesaurus and looked at all these words and variances. Every variance actually sounded better in that place, but it has a slightly different connotation than permutation, and a much different connotation than combination. So it is important to use those words. And I'm actually trying to find your poem, Missing Whom, which speaks directly to this, right?
Yeah, that's in Moraine. Yeah, Missing Whom. I have it right here. Yeah, because, English used to have two forms of you. We used to have the thou form, which is, casual or singular, and then the plural. And now, since we got rid of that, we're always using the plural or formal you. And sometimes it's just so awkward, like to say, when you're talking plural to people, like, I like your car, but is your car, you, plural? In English, in the old days, it would have been a difference between thy car, if you're talking to one person, or your, if you're talking to more than one. And now we say stuff like your guys's car. Where, I really like your guys's car. It sounds so lame. Right. And it's because we got rid of whom. We got rid of thou. We need whom. And but it's not going to happen. We also need a bunch of new pronouns.
I feel like as language transitions, because it's really a living fabric, which is why we don't have thy and thou, and
even though we need them,
but it's this living fabric. And so words keep aging out, and then new words come in, and some of them stick and some of them just get tossed by the wayside because they're just trendy, I guess. They don't have that longevity to them. I think eventually something will come in that will be right, but we do tend to recycle a lot. We recycle words and terms, and something that used to mean something at one time no longer means that. It's something totally different. It's hard to keep up. I hear this complaint a lot, like, people shouldn't be using this word for this, back in my day, etc. And I'll have the conversation with these folks that are getting really angry, and I'm like, it's actually a living fabric. So
yeah, it's language evolves. It's a living thing. Mm-hmm. And it's ridiculous to try to stop it. Like, when I was growing up, you got excited about things. Now you get excited for them. And there's no point in complaining that, people should say we get excited about, or we graduate from. You don't graduate high school, you graduate from it, but not anymore. Now you graduate high school. It's fine. Just, I think it's silly to try to stop the evolution of language. We could be like the French with their académie, and they don't let in any foreign words. But you know what? People use foreign words anyway. It's just pointless to try to stop it.
I still use both thanks for the invitation and thanks for the invite. Mm-hmm. And every time I hear myself saying thanks for the invite, I just think, oh, I cringe a little bit. That proper English student within me is just going, oh,
I know, but it's how we talk.
Don't do that.
I say stuff like that too. And also I swear a whole lot more than I really approve of, because it's how we talk. It's how we fucking talk.
Yeah. I do that too. And, I've commented that fuck is such a great word because it's a verb, it's a noun, it's an adjective. I mean, it is the most contortionist word of the English language. It can become anything that you want it to be.
Yeah, it's actually a wonderful word, and it's one of our oldest words. Let's just embrace it.
I think that if the words are available, use them, clearly within reason, but it's not going to go away just because somebody says that they're not going to use that word or they oppose swearing. Why? Why do you oppose swearing? I remember there was a discussion going on one of my friends' Facebook pages. And I said, I just read this great book and here's what was in it. And about 3 people asked me what's the name of the book? And I purposely didn't use it because I think the title of the book is Everything's Fucked, The Story of Hope. And really, in the end, it was funny because I was reading it like, okay, when does the hope come in? Well, it doesn't, because everything's fucked. And it's really a commentary, dissecting society type of book. It's a psychology book. And I thought it was a very good book. But as soon as I said, here's what it is, and I put F asterisk, ampersand, whatever, rather than putting the word out there, because I knew who the audience was, I said, there's a lot of swearing, and it actually makes the book a better read because of all of the foul language in there. And she said, oh, I will not be reading it. Thank you. And I'm like, okay. I think he was talking a lot about Maslow's scale or pyramid of hierarchy, and just having some foul language thrown in there occasionally just kind of made you go, oh, yeah, you know what? That's interesting. Thanks for putting it in that context.
I really hate the way history and science were taught when I was in school. They were just so boring because it was all from a book. Maybe if the book had used a little more interesting language, it would have been less awful. Maybe I would have cared. Because now as an adult, I'm interested in history and I'm interested in science. But as a student, they just didn't have enough swear words in those books, maybe.
That could be it. I just have to say, I hope you don't mind, I love this picture of you on the cover of Along the Fault Line.
What makes you think it's me?
I don't know. I just assumed it was you. And it reminds me of a Led Zeppelin cover.
Really? It is me.
I thought it was you. And there's just this sweet, innocent, natural, just like the world is right. It's a great picture. I really like it.
Yeah, it's a sunset. Yeah, I like that it's a modest, it's a nude photo, but it's modest. And actually, the photographer is an old friend, and he sold a lot of that. He used to sell, maybe he still does, sell photographs on the mall in Washington, D.C. on weekends. I'm sure he doesn't do that anymore, but he used to. And he sold a lot of them there. And I always kind of, as I kept coming out with these poems about growing up in the desert, I imagined this as a book cover. And I found a publisher who agreed that that would be a good idea. Shannon Phillips of Picture Show Press put the book together, and I think it came out really well.
Mm-hmm. There's this sense of, I don't know, just happy expectation about it. I like it. And the album cover I'm thinking of is Houses of the Holy. And I believe that these are Robert Plant's kids that are walking up some steps.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Now I'm looking at it because you mentioned it. Yeah, I wasn't big into Led Zeppelin, never looked at that album cover, but look at all those kids. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I was 18. And it's funny because photographer was the only friend that my brother had that I could relate to. He was interesting. He traveled, spoke some foreign languages. And anyway, and at some point early on in my womanhood, he was a lover at that point that he took that picture. And I was home for winter break. I was in college at UCSB at the time. And I'd come home, and he always wanted to come to the farm to pick fruit. And he wanted to go in the desert and do some photographs. And he told me he wanted to do some nude photographs. And that was fine with me. I was never modest in that way. And so we did. And when we got back, my dad said, "So what were you guys doing in the desert?" I said, "Oh, we were taking nude photos." My dad, of course, he just thought I was joking. And David was like mortified. He was so embarrassed. And my dad totally blew off.
Oh, that's hilarious.
It made me laugh just because David was so embarrassed about that. To my dad, understandably, he should have been embarrassed, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and your dad just didn't believe you. That's even better.
Right. Yeah.
She would never be that honest.
Yeah, he should have known. I mean, he knew I wasn't kind of a nudist. He should have known. But anyway. I was always skinny dipping. We had a pool, and I was always skinny dipping and stuff.
You just reminded me, I think it was you that told me the story about when you mentioned you were at Santa Barbara and all of you guys went like skinny dipping, or anyway, there was a photo that was taken in the dark and the next day you guys ended up in the paper naked.
Oh, yeah. We weren't skinny dipping, we were streaking. And that poem's in my book, Wild Domestic. Yeah, that was streaking was the craze back then. We were at UCSB streaking. It was so funny. Streaking the dean's house, streaking the whole place, and nobody cared. It was the middle of the night, but it was fun.
That's so funny.
And yeah, and in the morning, there we were in the school paper. And I've tried to find that photograph since. I've gone to UCSB, to the newspaper there, and looked in the archives, and I wasn't able to find it. But I'd love to see it because it was shocking. It was really shocking to see myself there naked. In the photograph, I happened to be with a bunch of guys, and I wasn't the only girl. And it was just very funny.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, it was a funny picture because the guys, it was taken right as they were on the down jump. So their penises were pointing upward, but they were not erect. And the guys were embarrassed by that. I remember that discussion of that the next day.
I bet. I bet.
We look so beauty. Well.
I don't know, maybe at that age I might not have been all that embarrassed about it, but I think that would be something that if I wasn't expecting it, if I woke up and there I am in a paper nude unexpectedly, I might be a bit embarrassed and just kind of, rethinking my choices.
Yeah. Well, you grew up, you're younger than I am. And, that was in the early 70s. I mean, it was just a big deal. Nudity was happening and streaking was popular and no big deal. Mm-hmm. But yeah, things got a little more conservative after that.
Well, speaking of that, I'm always thinking, thank God I grew up before social media, because now everything you do is on social media. I was wondering if you would mind, do you have a favorite poem? Would you mind reading one?
How about The Streak from my first full-length book, Wild Domestic? This is The Streak. It's a narrative poem. First, we streaked the dean's house. No one was home, but we ran around it anyway, in tennis shoes and nothing else covering our naked young bodies but night, except for the boy in the kilt, too long even for a giant, that he raised up so he could run and show his stuff. We ran across campus, streaked Stork Tower, hooting, hollering, whooping at our mostly unnoticed antics. We gathered ourselves into a circle in the quad, arms across shoulders, dancing the can-can or the hora or whatever it was, laughing, chanting, emboldened by beer and cheered by marijuana. Later, someone showed the photos they took for the school paper. There was I, the only girl to face the lens, my whiteness made shocking by that wedge of pubic hair, and all the guys, penises soft but pointing upward as caught by the camera, on the downward side of the hop, as though to say maybe they couldn't stop the war or the draft or even the irresistible pull of the system that would inevitably swallow them whole. But they weren't going to get hard about it. This was just a night to show that we weren't afraid to take our clothes off and have our pictures taken on a Saturday night in Isla Vista, California, with the damp air sharpened by eucalyptus and the gallons of oil that fouled the shore, while the charred remains of the Bank of America waited just off campus for the students, the nation, to forget all the fuss and, in fact, to join them when they got back to the business of chewing up the world.
It's always great to connect with Tamara. She has such a fine eye for detail and emotional honesty, and of course, a keen grasp of language, which I truly admire. Her poetry is a heartfelt series of love notes to life, even when it seems that there's not much to love about the moment. It runs from impetuous and whimsical moments of youth to deeply profound ponderings on life and its meaning. Come back next week when we continue the conversation with a second poem that is perhaps my absolute favorite. As always, I'll post links about everything that we talked about in the show notes. Don't forget to send me your questions and suggestions. I read every one of them, even if I don't have the opportunity to respond to them all. Please be sure to rate this episode. It only takes seconds, but your rating moves this podcast closer to the top of searches so that my friends and I can reach more people. I am looking forward to sharing more upcoming In the Company of Friends talks with you. So be sure to follow me on the socials and the .com, all at The Quaintrelle Podcast. That's TheQuaintrelle Podcast. I am Sheila-Na-Gig, The Quaintrelle, and until next time, I wish you passion, grace, adventure, elegance, and beauty.